Building judgment. We're not born with it. We have to build it. It is a skill. Take, for example, a first time parent. They bring their baby home, they hear the baby cry, they are freaked out. Are they hungry? Are they wet? Are they in pain? Are they tired? Every cry feels like an emergency potentially while you're learning what that baby actually needs. Meanwhile, perhaps a parent who has three kids already hears their newborn cry and says, "Oh, you know what? Sometimes they just cry out while they're napping. They usually go right back to sleep. Let's just give it a minute." We all learn through experience and trial and error. Our judgment sharpens when we make decisions. We look at the feedback, we evaluate the outcome, we start tying those together. Now, there is a facet of luck, so sometimes we'll make a good decision and have a bad outcome. But the only way to learn is to track your judgment and your outcomes and review them. We don't all have a guidebook that tells us the right decision for the optimal outcome. We have clues. We have context, we have points of view, and we can consider all of those. You have to build this over time, just like a parent listens to a cry and learns from it. They typically find out whether they're right or wrong and what that baby wanted. We all learn eventually, and that's how we build our judgment. It's frankly often the opposite of how people think we will build it. Philip Tetlock studied judgment across millions of predictions and found that what builds good judgment isn't necessarily years on the job, it's informed practice. It means tracking your calls, getting honest feedback, and then updating them and reviewing them. Not all practice is going to improve your skill. It has to be informed practice. So just making decisions and moving on, that isn't going to be enough. That is practice, but it's not enough to build your skill. You actually have to inform your practice. I made this decision. Here's why I made this decision. Here's what I expected the outcome to be. And here's what actually happened. Let's go back to your delivery manager role for the product launch and your sense that Marcus being unusually quiet was a cue you should pay attention to. So you left that meeting, but the next morning, instead of calling another all hands to get everybody to come back in, you decide to go over and talk to Marcus. And directly, one-on-one, you say, "Hey, in the meeting yesterday, it seemed like you were quieter than usual. I feel like maybe you had something else you wanted to share." And it turns out Marcus does want to unburden himself. He says, "A couple weeks ago, I shared with the team that there's an integration dependency. I flagged it, but nobody really thought it was that big of a deal. And I just don't want to be the same guy, as always, raising this in the meeting when everybody else is so sure that we're on track." Maybe the team forgot or didn't understand or they dismissed Marcus. The dashboard certainly didn't show that they understood that there was this issue. It was green. It takes you noticing your flicks, your signals, your intuition, the cues in the room, comparing it to the data, and as a human, intentional, unmachine leader, recognizing those and following through. It takes you making a judgment call to say, "Hey, based on this new information, I'm going to pull everybody back together. We're going to talk about this and troubleshoot the integration issue." Meanwhile, we're turning that dashboard yellow until we're able to work together to resolve the issue and make sure we're really on track for product launch. Now, that's one outcome to this story where you see that your discernment cues have been honored. You make a judgment call to analyze data, to learn more, to get curious, and that gives you more feedback and a change in direction and outcome. What if, though, for comparison, because this is where we often trip ourselves up, what if we take that same story and we don't go talk to Marcus? We just choose to keep ignoring the signal. Now, it could be that you ignore it. 1,000 things happen in the background that you may or may not be aware of, and the product still ends up shipping fine. Yay, team celebration. You could have just gotten lucky. That integration issue didn't turn out to be a big enough problem to prevent the launch, or maybe behind the scenes it got resolved, but you won't know. And you'll think that you made the right call because you trusted the dashboard, you ignored your instinct. Next time, though, you might not get lucky. So what can you do? How can you tell luck from good judgment and optimal outcomes? If you are really interested in learning a lot more about this, I suggest you read Annie Duke, Thinking in Bets. She's a former professional poker player. You don't have to know anything about poker to enjoy this book. She helps you understand good decisions and good outcomes are not necessarily the same thing. She shows that you can decide poorly and still get lucky. And she teaches you concepts about how to judge the decision, not the result, so that you don't learn the wrong lessons. Likewise, we heard from Sir Andrew, the former dean of the London Business School, in a prior episode, and he also talks about judgment versus decision making versus luck, and that you need to successfully separate these because success is not necessarily a reliable proxy for judgment. You could get lucky. There could be timing. There could be all sorts of components that lead to an outcome that wasn't necessarily directly tied to you making a good decision. So you've got to track these to learn. He also mentions that overconfidence is one of the biggest enemies for leaders trying to make good decisions and deploy good judgment. So we bring bias. We stop listening to others. We forget to learn from our mistakes. confidence. We need confidence. That's an absolute, but being overconfident by ignoring clues, failing to listen, failing to learn from history and mistakes actually leads to less sound judgment. Another point that he makes is we've got to understand that risk runs through everything, and we need to be really dialed into how much does the choice matter? How important is this? And how familiar are we with the situation? Because the less familiar we are, the worse our track record is. And so we have a greater risk of moving forward, trusting our gut when we shouldn't, when we should be validating, getting more points of view, getting perspective, and getting curious and gathering data. When you know a choice matters and you're in unfamiliar territory, stop, go get more information. And let's tie this into AI. AI is a great tool that can give us a lot more data and it can get us to different decision points faster, but we have to exercise judgment. So if you're relying on AI to inform your decisions, then you must keep that in mind as a consideration and balance it with solid judgment and evaluation. You can build this muscle. You can train yourself to have good judgment. Leaders with good judgment, according to Harvard Business Review, tend to be good listeners, good readers, and can recognize their own emotions and biases, taking them out of the equation as needed and adapting and expanding, and are adept at expanding the array of choices they consider. So bringing lots of points of views, including dissenting points of views, and looking at all of them before making a decision or a judgment call. And y'all, I just love this. It is validation for all the time that Boss at the Helm spends on teaching humanity skills like listening, emotional intelligence, perspective, civil debate. These are building blocks. They're components of so many other critical leadership skills, including judgment. So back to Sir Andrew Likierman, he has 6 points for helping to build your judgment. He has a book on this. There's also lots of podcasts and interviews with him. And so one of the things I want to point out to you is that he says there's 6 parts to this, but they're not sequential. He says do as many of them as you can in any given situation. One of them is knowledge and experience, making sure you have relevant knowledge and experience and that you don't have too narrow a knowledge base. So what tends to happen is when we have too narrow experience or too narrow knowledge, maybe in a deep domain experience, we use that, but we make judgments out of habits there, and we don't necessarily have relevant information, knowledge, or experience for the situation we're actually trying to make a judgment on. The second one is trust. So you're looking to seek diversity, not validation. You want reliable evidence from reliable sources. And really the important thing here that happens to leaders sometimes by choice, but also sometimes by happenstances, you start to get echo chambers where people just say back to you what they think you want to hear, and you don't question or challenge that. And so one of the ideas is to make sure that you have people in your trusted group who actively either dissent, disagree with you, or take the role of playing devil's advocate so that you can get a dissenting or a different perspective and point of view. The third one is awareness, listening attentively, reading critically, noting all the cues that you have and what's going on around you, and to be careful that you don't filter information to weed out the parts that you don't like. So a lot of times what he says is, well, consciously filter information and not be critical enough of what we're hearing and reading. It's important to be skeptical of information. That's not negative. It's skeptical. If it doesn't make sense, if it seems too good to be true, if you don't know enough about it or have enough expertise about it, get skeptical in a way that allows you to explore it. Also, know your own feelings and beliefs. Identify what your feelings are, what your beliefs are, where you have biases, because our feelings and our beliefs and our biases will distort the choices that we make. You want to be able to play devil's advocate. You want to kind of role play or predict how this could turn out well, how it might turn out poorly. Make sure that biases in the room are all discussed and aware, and avoid that we all think the same, we all 100% agree, and avoid that situation like we saw on the team where most of the team agrees that we're on track, but Marcus doesn't, and he doesn't feel comfortable sharing that information. Look for lots of options. So reject the idea that we have no other option. We hear that a lot sometimes, but that is rarely true. The truth is we have other options, we just don't like them. And so you really want to start exploring all the options, whether they feel good or not. It may be things like we can't do anything about it right now, or we've got to delay until we get more information, or we've got a limited time trial where we're going to put something into place to see how it goes. There are generally other options for you to consider, and you need to surface them instead of saying, this is the only option, we can only do one thing. And then the 6th component is how feasible is your execution? You may make a great decision and then not think through, can we actually put this into place? Can we make it happen? One great way to really understand this is to predict the future, predict a successful future, and say, in 6 months' time, we've implemented this decision. It got all the things we wanted and more, and here's why. And then you have to step back and say, what are the specific things that helped you reach that success? And then the opposite of that is consider you did not get what you wanted. Predict that you fail at this, that you've made a judgment call and it didn't work out the way you planned. What are the ways, the obstacles, the things that tripped you up, the circumstances you had no way of knowing about that you can envision and then see if you can work around them? Both of those could help you in making sure that you can deliver against what you've actually made a judgment call on. You know that at Boss at the Helm, we teach the Helm Method. It's a framework where we aim, act, and adjust. And so you can also use this to help you build your judgment muscle. Aim is set your intention to build and strengthen your judgment. And remember, with intentional leadership, we have to set and reset. It's adjust and reset. It's not, I'm going to be better at judgment, and then I tried and I failed, and so I'm done here. It is cultivating your transformation by acting, being aware, adjusting as needed with compassion and grace. So act. And remember, a critical component to acting, if you recall from earlier in this episode, is you need to track your decisions. Before you know the outcome, start writing down, what's the decision I'm making? What do I expect to happen? Why do I think that's going to happen? You can do that pre-mortem exercise where you envision the outcome in the future and work your way back as well. And then make sure you write down what actually happens. Go back and read these, give some time in between, and make sure you're reviewing these as a sort of log or a cycle that helps you understand and create a feedback loop so that judgment actually grows. The next time you need to make a judgment call, you can look back at this data and remember to do these activities where you are envisioning what could go right and what could go wrong and work backwards from those. And then another perspective is to go seek out that contrarian view. Find somebody before you make a final decision. Say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And look for people who will give you a dissenting opinion if they truly feel like it's not the right thing, or people who will play the role of a dissenting opinion so you can find those facets that you want to tease out to make sure this is a good, sound judgment. And the third step is adjust. So as you're building this muscle, you learn your blind spots. You see repeated biases. You see where certain decisions have consistent outcomes. And you remember that in new environments, you don't have as much data or experience to rely on. And so that impacts the type of decision you make and how much additional diligence you need to put into understanding the data and the choices and the options and the outcomes before you make that judgment call. Ways to put this into practice this week. The easy way is to start keeping your decision log. What's your call? What do you expect to happen? Why do you expect it to happen? And then make sure you write down the outcome and start reviewing that. Take it a little further, start doing pre-mortems before you have big decisions. Picture it as a failed outcome. Name the things that killed it. Name the biases that popped in or the unconsidered actions that happened. And do the same thing. Or consider it was successful and figure out, how did you get to that success? A little bit harder to do. Before you make your next tough or high stakes decision, go find somebody who doesn't agree with you and have a discussion with them about it. And then a bonus for you is try this with AI. Take a look at a project, a process, an automated prompt that you tend to use with AI, and see if you think there's any questionable information, something that needs more validation. Are you able to make a good decision from this information? And if you applied the 30-second sign-off exercise from a prior episode, would it pass here? Would you have any blind spots? What's the impact? Would you be willing to sign off on it? Try any of these this week to help you build your judgment. I hope this series on discernment and judgment has been very helpful to you and that you will take it forward in your daily life and at work. Discernment and judgment are human intelligence skills. If you want to know more about those, there's an Unmachined Top 10 Human Skills that no algorithm can copy, a free download for you. The link is below in the description. I'd invite you to keep building your intentional leadership skills here with us. Every week, we post a new mini but mighty leadership lesson to help you level up both personally and professionally. And if you're a corporate executive and you're looking to build judgment across the organization with practice and feedback and shared language, I invite you to check out the Helm Leadership Essentials cohort program. It's built to help organizations cultivate intentional leaders with humanity and human intelligence skills. You can reach out to me at bossatthehelm.com. Start with yourself, and then lead others. Be a boss. I thank you for being here, and if you've enjoyed this, please tap like and consider subscribing to the channel. We'll see you here next week.